into the State Senate.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members, my name is Lester Bagley. I'm Vice President of Public Affairs and Stadium Development for the Minnesota Vikings. With me today are Steve Poppin, our Vice President of Finance and Chief Financial Officer of the Vikings. Mr. Poppin will cover our Ramsey County agreement, kind of give an update to members on where we are there. And Don Becker to my left. Don Becker is the project lead. He's with the Arden Hills. And he'll talk about the real estate and development issues associated with the Arden Hills site. First, I want to say thank you very much for the opportunity to let us make our case today. We think we have a good story to tell, so we look forward to having a good conversation with members. We are appreciative of Governor Dayton, legislative leaders, Senator Koch, and other caucus leaders for addressing this issue and rolling up the sleeves and trying to find a solution. We're very grateful. Senator Rosen, Representative Lanning for being the leads on this issue. We also appreciate the business community backing a resolution and organized labor for being involved in pushing this forward, and of course our fans for being behind us. We're grateful for the Senate for having the hearings. Let me say from the outset that we want to be here. We are doing everything we can to solve this issue in Minnesota. The Minnesota Vikings belong in Minnesota. And so with that, we do have a presentation that's, I think, slides in your packet that's kind of fly through real quickly, and certainly be prepared to answer any questions you may have. And to follow up on Mr. Mondale's testimony, the Metrodome has served the state well. We've had more than 90 million visitors over 30 seasons. But the problems with the facility are challenging. It was built in 1982. It was built at the end of an era, end of a construction cycle. If you recall, the Metrodome was actually opened without air conditioning, and they went back and added air conditioning. They were going to build it without suites, and the Vikings stepped up and invested in the suites. And bottom line, it's the smallest stadium in the NFL in terms of footprint, as discussed in the previous panel. A challenge to have both fan amenities and revenue opportunities. It's a facility that no longer works for the state. That we will not have another NCAA basketball tournament. We will not have another Super Bowl unless we solve this issue and present a new facility. The Metrodome can no longer compete with other facilities and other communities throughout this country. In terms of the NFL, we're at the bottom of the league in stadium revenues in virtually every category. We're either last or second to last in revenues. And then, as I said, and as was discussed earlier, the fan amenities are challenging. It's dicey getting through the concourses. We have crowded concourses. We have a lack of facilities. As Mr. Mondale said, you have to make that call at halftime. Are you going to get a hot dog, or are you going to the bathroom? You can't do both and make it back for the third quarter. So the facility is no longer viable, and we're happy to answer any questions on that. We believe it's time to reinvest in a new multi-purpose facility. The Vikings lease expires after this football season. This conversation has gone on. The issues are clear. We've been discussing this issue for more than 10 years. It's been pushed out and toward the end, and now it can't be pushed out any longer. The antiquated Metrodome causes this market and this team to be subsidized by other NFL teams because of the Metrodome, because of its challenges. The Vikings in this market have received $15 to $20 million annually in subsidy from other owners and other teams and other markets because of its challenges. The project costs, and we're looking at some documents back in 2001 when we were talking about a joint Gopher Viking facility. The stadium that we're talking about was less than $400 million, and it was a covered facility. This project now, after 10 years, has now tripled in cost. And as we've said, we believe that delays in avoiding the issue, it makes it only more expensive and more difficult to resolve. Bottom line, we've got opportunity with the new facility to create jobs and economic impact. We have a construction industry and costs that are at bargain prices. We have an opportunity to leverage the third largest private and team contribution in NFL history. We're in a small market. We have owners that are willing to put up the third largest contribution in NFL history for a stadium, and we have a chance to secure the Vikings for the next generation. In terms of the jobs, I think there will be a panel on jobs. I won't get too deeply into that other than opportunity to create 7,500 construction jobs over this 3-year build cycle, 40-month build cycle, 4.3 million work hours, more than around $300 million in wages are part of this $1 billion proposal. And so there's a great opportunity to put people back to work and get Minnesota companies and subcontractors who pay Minnesota taxes and employ Minnesota workers back to work. The multi-purpose stadium is a people's stadium. It will be owned and used by the public. It will not be owned by the Vikings. It will be owned and used by the public. Having an NFL team requires a viable facility. And building a stadium allows the state to maximize its use and make sure that it's used for all those events that Mr. Mondale talked about, high school sports, baseball, football, cheerleading, soccer, all those events that are held at the Metrodome are going to be held at this new facility. Again, the Super Bowl, NCAA basketball, a Major League Soccer team. This weekend, the Big Ten is holding a Big Ten, their first ever conference championship. It's going to be in Indianapolis, and it's Penn State versus Wisconsin, and it could be held in Minnesota. It's being held in Indianapolis that doesn't have a Big Ten college, but it's being held because of the facility in that community. There's no reason why we should not be in the rotation to host the Big Ten football championship every couple of years. So those are the opportunities with a new multi-purpose facility that will not come to Minnesota if we don't replace the current facility. Just a point on the fact that the Vikings are Minnesota's team. More than half of all of our residents in this state follow the Vikings every Sunday. We average a 68 to 69 share on television. That means that 69% of the televisions that are watching Viking football. Our radio audience is 750,000. We have 63,000 plus in the Metrodome. All told, more than half of every man, woman, and child in Minnesota are following this team. Online, people follow the team online. We have 52 million people visiting Vikings.com, and the Star Tribune told us last year that their two largest days in web hits were number one when Brett Favre signed with the Vikings in 2009, and number two when President Obama was elected. So that's the power of Viking football. When we played the Saints in the NFC Championship game in 2010, and Steve asked me not to bring it up and bring up bad memories, but we were watched by 58 million people nationwide. So again, to the points that were made earlier, the importance of the Vikings brand nationally are significant. We're a committed community partner. Our organization has invested heavily in the community. We have 53 players on our roster. All 53 of them, for the fourth year in a row, have participated in our community outreach. We have a children's fund, Vikings Children's Fund, that partners with the University of Minnesota, Department of Pediatrics, and the Children's Hospital at Amplatz Children's Hospital. A tremendous partnership there, and a tremendous part of being involved with the Vikings is giving back to the community, and we're very proud of that. Our twins, the Wild and the Timberwolves, we're blessed to have the teams and their work in the community. In terms of economic impact, there is a real economic impact of having an NFL team in this market. We have more than $130 million comes into Minnesota's economy each year through NFL revenue sharing. That's the television contract and the merchandise that's shared amongst all 32 teams. That $130 million plus would not come here but for the Vikings in this state. 22% of our season ticket holders, we have more than 50,000 season ticket owners. 22% of them live outside Minnesota. Every Sunday we have more than 10,000 people coming to Minnesota from Iowa, the Dakotas, western Wisconsin, from Canada, and they come here and they stay in hotels and they eat at our restaurants and buy retail. So there's again, without a team, we wouldn't have those 10,000 people coming on game day Sundays. The Sports Commission's done some studies on their website about retaining the Vikings, and building a new facility will provide $26 million annually in taxes. There's been some discussion over the last couple of days about the but-for taxes. We put a newspaper ad in the paper to point out the fact that the Vikings pay $20 million in taxes in 2010. When you add our visiting team income taxes to that, it's $21 million. But for the Vikings, these taxes would not be paid in Minnesota. And again, to Mr. Mondale's point, these taxes over 33 years, there's enough, when you account for growth, those taxes would be enough to pay debt service on $650 million of bonds. The Sports Commission talked about the paid it forward argument. $33 million in public money into the Metrodome, but in return, the taxes have generated $320 million in taxes since the Metrodome opened. Lastly, is just on the Arden Hills situation. We think it's important to understand how the Vikings got to Arden Hills. This is the Wilfs' 7th year as owners, and they've been good owners. They've been patient owners. They've invested or tried to invest in a winning team. This year is a bit of a transition year on the field, but we've had good owners. They've invested in our community, and they were directed since becoming owners in 2005 to identify an ideal site, find a local partner, find a local contribution, and put a significant team contribution on the table. We've done all those things. I think we're going to get into that here in a second, but real quick about the benefits about Arden Hills. It's 10 miles or less than 10 miles from where we sit today. It is less than 10 miles from both downtowns. 40% of our season ticket owners live outside the 7-county metro area. So 40% of our fans travel to Viking games every Sunday. They like this site. They want this site. They like the tailgating and the optimum game day experience that this will provide. This destination where you can watch Viking practice, go to a Hall of Fame, go to a team store, and have that opportunity for some elbow room and return that tailgating experience. So the public benefits. We have an opportunity to clean up the state's largest Superfund site. We have these off-site road improvements that are needed in this region, regardless of whether there's a stadium. Here's an opportunity to leverage this situation. This facility will benefit the county and the city by having more than 1 million visitors each year come to this site in Arden Hills. We have a vision for what we'd like to see there. Our owners have a vision for Arden Hills. We believe it's the ideal site. Again, we've spent more than a year analyzing the site, several months negotiating with Ramsey County, and spent significant resources in vetting this site. It's important, again, to understand the deal that the Vikings negotiated with Ramsey County, and I'd like to ask Steve Poppin to comment on that from here. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Poppin, welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Lester. Well, we want to show you the plan that we negotiated with Ramsey County over several months this past year. We are aware that some things have changed since our negotiations with Ramsey County have concluded, like the governor's and the legislator's position on local option sales taxes, but we think it is important for you to understand how we got here. On the first slide on page 12, our original plan with Ramsey County called for a stadium project budget of approximately $1.1 billion.
Excuse me, Mr. Poppin, I want to make sure that folks have the right present. Is it in the folder or?
It should be in the folder.
In the folder.
Correct, Jeff?
Yeah. It's the same one Lester was following. Yeah. So it's on page 6, Madam Chair. It says page 12 on the
slide 12.
Slide 12 on page 6.
The large version. So slide 12.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The total budget of approximately $1.1 billion. That $1.1 billion is made up of a fixed roof stadium, costed out at $122 million, site and parking costs related to the 260 acres for the stadium site of $100 million, on-site costs of $58 million, land purchase and remediation costs of $30 million, and off-site transportation costs of $101 million. And slide 13, the sources used to finance that $1.1 billion is a Vikings private contribution of $425 million. Of that $409 million would be going directly to the stadium, and then $16 million to make up the $425 would be used to purchase the adjacent land and remediate that land. next to the stadium site. Under our plan with Ramsey County, there was a half-cent local option sales tax that generated $350 million for the project. The state of Minnesota in at $300 million, and then the Metrodome land sale and any cash reserves available of the Metrodome site to be put into the project at $36 million. Under the plan with Ramsey County, the Vikings commitments to this plan, again, were $425 million in team and private contribution. The Vikings would sign a 30-year lease with this commitment. Under the plan, the team would be responsible for stadium construction cost overruns. The team would be responsible for off-site transportation cost overruns. The Vikings would be responsible for any shortfalls associated with those Metrodome proceeds that are part of the funding source. The Vikings would contribute annually or pay annual operating expenses of the stadium at estimated approximately $17 million a year. And we would perform and any capital repairs and improvements to the stadium. In addition to that, similar to the Twins, if the team was sold after legislation was passed, the public would share in any profits associated with the legislation passing. Ramsey County's commitments as part of the Vikings Ramsey County plan was $350 million into the project. Again, with the local option sales tax of a half-cent, the county would be responsible for $1.5 million of contributions towards annual operations of the stadium. The county would put in $1 million to the capital reserve fund on an annual basis. Ramsey County was responsible for the land acquisition and remediation cost overruns of the 260 acres related specifically to the stadium site. And Ramsey County was responsible for cost overruns on on-site public infrastructure. As Lester mentioned on slide 16, as Lester mentioned in his part of the presentation, the uses of the People's Stadium, here's our plan for the operations of the People's Stadium. Under the Vikings Ramsey County plan for the People's Stadium, the Stadium Authority would own all of the stadium facility as well as the related parking. The Stadium Authority would provide input and would approve a third-party operator for the operations of the facility. The Stadium Authority would approve an operating plan to establish the protocol for that stadium, what is really the backbone of the operations of that stadium. And in addition to that, on an annual basis, the Stadium Authority would approve the budget that would carry out that operational plan. The Stadium Authority would ensure public access to this facility, and the operations of the Stadium Authority would be funded by the team and ancillary event revenue at the stadium. As far as the physical operations of the facility, we've agreed it's something that, with respect to operations throughout the league, 100% of NFL teams where whoever the entity that's responsible for the operations of that facility operates the stadium. So when we originally negotiated our deal with Ramsey County, the Vikings were actually operating that facility. Subsequent to that, in concluding those negotiations, we heard feedback from the state that was an issue. So through that process, we have agreed to have a third-party operator actually operate that facility to carry out the operations of the People's Stadium. So that third-party operator will be used to maximize the use of that facility. Events to be held in that stadium will benefit both the state and the community. The third-party operator will seek to have similar events that are done at the Metrodome, right now ensuring public access to the facility, and that third-party operator in segregated funds would retain the revenues from those ancillary events that would ultimately go to offsetting operating expenses.
Mr. Pop and I would just note that we're closing in on time, so if you want to get to the high points, if you will.
Yep. So the Vikings under the operations of the People's Stadium is the Vikings will fund the annual operating expenses. We will fund any shortfalls related to special or to stadium events, and the team in the county will contribute some capital to a capital reserve fund. The Vikings ultimately will be responsible for any capital shortfalls for that facility, and then the team would retain all NFL revenues related to their games at the facility. Thank you.
Mr. Becker, welcome.
Yes. Good morning, Madam Chair. My name's Don Becker. I've been working with the Vikings and the Sports Commission for about 5 years now on the design and development of the stadium. I'm based in New Jersey. I only have 2 slides, so this will be quick. The smallest part of the presentation this morning. So on page 9, as already has been mentioned, the stadium design that is currently contemplated is about 1.5 million square feet. We designed the stadium based on the program of Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. We are looking for that optimal fan experience that Mr. Mondale was talking about: wide concourses, sufficient restrooms, enhanced concessions, accessibility for people with disabilities, pre-event activity space for things to do before and after events at the stadium. We'd like to have a team store and a Hall of Fame incorporated into the design, and also room for tailgating and the optimal NFL game day experience that Lester was talking about. This is to be a people's stadium for multiple uses. We also would like to incorporate a transportation plan that would use state-of-the-art technology for access to the stadium: software, variable message signboards, things of that nature. The Arden Hills site, there's a diagram to my left on the Arden Hills site that shows a possible development scenario for the 430 acres. And just to clear up a couple of questions regarding the Arden Hills site, Ramsey County, when Ramsey County first came and approached the Vikings and said we have an optimal site for the stadium development, the site happens to be 430 acres. That's how much land the Army is selling. So the Army is looking to sell the land, all of it, 430 acres. We need 260 acres for the stadium. So the remaining 170 acres is what's left, what's available that's non-stadium related. If it happened to be 300 acres that the Army was selling, we'd be looking to develop the remaining 30 acres. So there's no magic to the 170 acres. The Ramsey County's goal in bringing the site to our attention was A, to clean up the Superfund site and put it into productive use, and B, to spur economic development of the remaining portion of the site. There's no guarantee the surrounding development will occur. In our negotiation with Ramsey County insisted that if we didn't develop in a certain amount of time, that we'd have to sell the land back to them at our original cost plus $1. So we have 8 years to develop the site, otherwise we have to return it to Ramsey County. As I mentioned, the Army's selling the entire parcel, so as part of our process of negotiating the deal, the GSA on behalf of the Army was selling the land. We obtained a fair market value appraisal for the 430-acre parcel. We obtained an appraisal. The GSA on behalf of the Army obtained their appraisal. We negotiated a fair market value price. The fair market value was determined based upon the highest and best use of the property as a mixed-use development. So it would comprise some amount of residential, some amount of retail, some amount of commercial office. That's what's anticipated for the remaining 170 acres. So once the stadium is developed on 260 acres, the surrounding parcel would be developed to its highest and best use, which we would anticipate being that same mixed-use retail, residential, and commercial office. Things that are required to do as part of the development: obviously we have to find tenants, we'd have to find residents, we would have to start paying real estate taxes day one to the City of Arden Hills and Ramsey County. We'd have to install municipal roads, install the utilities that would be required for development. Ultimately, we'd have to build the buildings that are required, whether they're for residential occupancy, tenancy, or home ownership. Same for retail buildings or commercial office buildings. The site work on the site that would have to be done, tenant improvements, financing costs, providing guarantees to lenders in order to get the development to happen. So that's what would be anticipated over time, hopefully soon after the stadium is developed. The land acquisition with the Army is the deal, as Ramsey County will testify. The deal with the Army is now in place. subject to a fixed fee remediation contract being negotiated in the next 60 days. So as far as one of the issues that was raised by the Met Council and the Sports Facilities Commission in their study of the site, the ability to acquire the site within the $30 million allotted in the budget Mr. Poppin mentioned, we're basically at the point where that can be done within the budgeted amount. Madam Chair.
Thank you. And we do have a few minutes for questions, but just a few minutes. Senator McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question may be for you, Mr. Bagley, and also maybe for Mr. Mondale. But you mentioned that this is going to be a multi-use facility because there's 12 Vikings games a year, and so there'll be other events going on here. We have a lot of facilities in Minnesota, in our metropolitan area, that handle events. We've got the Xcel Energy, we've got Xcel Energy Center, we've got Target Field, Target Stadium, Metrodome, Blaine Sports Facilities. We've got a lot of facilities in Minnesota. Is there anyone that's paying attention to what the capacity for this area is to sustain sports facilities? Because we could build this great facility and have 12 games there, and then the rest of it would be in competition with all the other facilities we have. And I'm just wondering if anyone's really assessing our ability to keep all of these facilities going.
Senator McGuire, that's also a very good question, but probably more properly addressed to the Sports Facility Commission.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I had my hand raised, but we ended questions before I could ask it.
But we may ask the Sports Facility Commission to get back to you with the answer to that question if that works for you, or we can talk about it at the next hearing. If there's time at the end of this committee hearing, we'll have them address the question.
Could I then direct my question to Mr. Bagley? What other multi-use activities would you anticipate would be part of this stadium?
Well, right now, Madam Chair, Senator McGuire, right now the Metrodome it has a calendar of events. There are approximately 300 events a year. I think again they would be best to testify to that. But as some of those that we would envision, we will get a Super Bowl back in Minnesota if we can resolve this issue. It would be subject to NFL owner vote. But the NFL has changed the way they've awarded Super Bowls. They are rewarding, if you will, communities and states that step up and solve stadium issues. The Super Bowl this year will be in Indianapolis, where they built a new facility a couple years ago, Lucas Oil Field. So Super Bowl, that's admittedly a one-time deal. NCAA basketball, as we said earlier, that they will not be coming back to this market unless we resolve this issue. But it's the Sports Commission and the NCAA had a great history of having events here, NCAA regionals and Final Fours, and there's no doubt that the NCAA loves to come to this market. They love the Twin Cities market, but the facility is now a challenge. If the facility has a retractable roof, that there is a possibility that the Viking ownership would acquire or attempt to acquire a Major League Soccer franchise. Major League Soccer right now has 18 home games, I believe, and 17. The league average is 17,000 fans per game. So that's a half of a hockey season or half of a basketball season right there. There are concerts and some of the events that are held there. But the other part of it to make it a people's stadium is to guarantee, in this agreement that we had in the negotiations we've had with the state leadership as well as Ramsey County, is to guarantee that this new facility will hold those community events, those state high school events that don't generate revenue, but they are important part of the fabric of Minnesota. It truly the Metrodome has been a statewide asset. The new facility will be a statewide asset. It will be owned by the public and used by everyone from throughout the state. A lot of people have some of their best memories of their high school years has been playing on the field where the Vikings play, or cheerleading, or playing baseball. So all those events will continue, and we're committed to that, and I think the state is committed to that, and again, I think the Sports Commission can testify in more detail.
Thank you. Members, we have just a minute left for this panel, so Senator Marty, if you'll be brief, and then Senator
Madam Chair, I will try and be brief. First of all, I understand the purpose of this is for largely public to testify, and I understand you wanted to limit this to location, which is what my questions were going to be on. though I do think it's a bit of a sideshow because I think 99% of the people who are contacting us, it's not about where it's located, it's about the amount of money they're asking for. $60 for every subsidy for every seat at every game for the next 30 years is a lot of money. But like with the Sports Facilities Commission, they didn't answer the question I was trying to get answered, and they said a couple of things I think were factually inaccurate, and I'd love to press that, but I hope that can come out on next week's hearing. The only question I have here today for the Vikings is Mr. Poppin was on his slide on page 16. He said the stadium authority will own and operate the stadium and parking facilities, and I'm just curious, there are 21,000 spaces, and if it's $40, $50 a spot, that's $800,000 to $1 million, $800,000 to $1 million a game. Who gets the money from that?
Madam Chair, Senator Marty, the revenues generated by the team for our games, it is our proposal that those stay with the team.
So, Madam Chair, the stadium authority will own and operate it, but the money all goes to the team.
But those
Senator, Mr. Poppin, but for the record, I'm repeating your name so that we have an accurate
Absolutely,
transcript.
sorry.
So, Mr. Poppin.
Chairwoman Nortman, Senator Marty, one of the things that we've accepted in this proposal is for the team to pay the annual operating expenses of the facility. So a very important part is for us to be able to generate the revenues to help pay for those operations. So that's a significant point. Obviously, with respect to pricing of parking on our games, it will be market driven. So $50, I think, is a stretch. So,
Madam Chair, on that point, then, in other words, when you say it's publicly owned, but all the money, I mean, it's kind of like I own the building and you're the renter and you get all the money instead of the landlord getting any of the money? I mean, that's what I'm trying to get at because you talk about it being public. And I understand how you get out of paying property taxes that way, but it seems to be that it's not really public if you get all the money from it. We build it, you get the naming rights. We build it, you get the parking revenue. That's what I'm trying to get at.
If I could, Madam Chair, Senator Marty, just a reminder that Mr. Poppin's testimony about the cost of operating a roofed facility is, when you add the capital improvements and ongoing operations, it's approximately $20 million a year. Not only have the Vikings committed the third largest capital contribution, $425 million up front, but we've also committed to guarantee those events that we talked about with Senator McGuire, guarantee that's the People's Stadium, and that we would cover the $20 million annually and on top of the capital investment. And the events that occur and the revenues that accrue will basically go to offset the operating losses of that level of $20 million is a significant level to have a roof facility and to operate the facility.
Madam Chair.
Senator Marty, I'm sorry, we're out of time. Senator Goodwin, I'm going to ask you, since you're in one of the panels to testify, maybe you could hold your comments or questions to them. We do want to stay on time here to serve all those that came today to testify. So, Senator Marty, I encourage you to follow up with them. They will be back next week. Mr. Bagley, you'll be back next week?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Very much. Appreciate it.
We have Commissioner Bennett and Ms. Worthington from Ramsey